Welcome back to East Asian Management. I'm SeanWatts. As you know, you're able to talk to me anytime. And we have three different TAs. Thuong is one of them here. We started last class talking about the class requirements. This information here, the idea of how you're supposed to do a project and the evaluations for the class, the idea of it's good to replicate the best possible people around you and share some of this valuable information with advice to companies can get you close to others. If you have any questions about that, or the idea of Korean culture and working with Korean culture, or the idea of money culture or environment culture or grant culture, please let me know. We can talk about those things. Otherwise, as I recall, I've started to talk to you guys about a little bit of this last class. Do you guys remember some of these details of what we were talking about last class before I start teaching something new? You, Uno, can you comment and help us? Can you remember what were some of the things we talked about last class?
The author's name, but I remember like Maslow hierarchy, and you mentioned about the differences between United States and Korea regarding power distance and hierarchy system.
Yes, for sure. I think we were talking mostly about the idea of countries are different. And so we showed some of the details related to Korea's culture. I hope you remember that Korea has the exact same culture as El Salvador and Venezuela. I used to live in El Salvador before coming here, except I got tired of getting bullet holes in my truck. So I came to Korea, which is much safer and growing faster. But other than that, the culture is supposed to be the same. It's interesting. We were talking about uncertainty avoidance. Pia, can you refresh our memory? Do you remember what is uncertainty avoidance?
Yeah, it's when you don't want to take a lot of risk. So I think states like, for example, maybe it was mentioned in the video, Singapore, they're like very open to new innovation and they're like not as risk avoidance, or they don't avoid risk that much. But if you're like afraid of change, yeah, you tend to do the same thing that you always do.
That's partly true, but okay. If Korea is very much avoiding uncertainty, how would you explain that it is famous for being one of the fastest growing countries in the world? Thomas, can you comment about that?
Well, of course, under the government policy, which is the miracle of the Hanga. But actually, I was also curious, uncertainty avoidance differences between Korea, China, and America. But the graph shows that China has pretty low uncertainty avoidance rate. So I really understand why this happens. Because China is a like communist country and Korea is like open from what I think. So
you're right.
Yeah.
Any guesses? I'll give you 5-10 seconds.
Well, maybe because of the war, like history, like Korea was colonized by Japan and we were attacked by a lot of different countries like China. Maybe that's why like our country is reluctant to try something new. We're kind of scared of something new, maybe.
Okay, so the reality of being afraid of trying something new is one part, but my question is, although people may be afraid of trying something new, how do we explain the opposite? The opposite is this country grew faster than almost any other country in the world. Up until last year and the year before, recently, Vietnam has been growing faster. Vietnam and Nigeria have recently been the fastest growing countries in the world. But before that, from 1970s, 80s, 90s, Korea was the fastest growing country in the world. So that seems to be the opposite of what Hofstede says.
I cannot really explain related to avoidance uncertainty avoidance rate, but from what I know is because Korea does not have a lot of natural resources, so we really focused on education on people. So maybe that's why by educating a lot of people, we could high standard of knowledge, and we could develop pretty fast.
That is true today, but what is the growth rate of Korea today versus back in the 70s when Korea was growing super fast, 70s, 80s, 90s? Was education really important in the 70s? Did you have education back in the 70s?
I didn't born. I was not.
Right. So one thing to think about is there's about 50 million people in Korea in a very, very small area versus China, which you were talking about. China has over 1 billion people over one of the biggest countries in the world. They're spread out all over the place. It's very hard to get everybody, 1 billion people, to do anything. It's hard to even talk to them. It's hard to give them notification that there's a war if there's a war, for example. But since everybody in Korea is in a small area, most of them are around Seoul, and everybody still very obediently follows the government, it's a lot easier for the government to say, do this, and everybody does this. Versus in China, you can't. Physically, it's hard to communicate with over 1 billion people. So in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the government said, everybody work together, everybody develop export, and the government gave money only to companies that were doing export, like Samsung, like Hyundai, those type of companies. The government encouraged everybody to work for those companies and really didn't give money to any other companies. They didn't give money to anybody to start new things. It was very hard to start new companies or new projects. That's one of the reasons why entrepreneurship is very limited in Korea. It's new. We're starting to try to develop it. But the government basically was like one father or one CEO telling everybody in the company, we have to do this to survive, and everybody did it. And just because there's so many people in such a broad area in China, they can't. However, the government in China can obviously speak very well in Beijing and speak very well and control the people in Shanghai. So if we look at education records, as you've identified, the education records show Beijing and Shanghai have the best education in the world, at least best educational scores amongst high school students. So in the 90s, when I'm talking about educational scores, there weren't educational scores basically recorded in the 70s and 80s as much. Korea was very good. Korea, Japan, Finland were considered amongst the best in the world for education. However, Beijing and Shanghai had even better education than the average in Korea. So education is good, but for the growth of the country, the management depended on the government. And it still depends on the government in Korea, in most of Asia, and in many parts of the world. Look at how Donald Trump was able to promote his own companies and yet stop other companies when he was controlling the government, even in the United States. In Asia, where the government has much more power and less citizens objecting against the government, it's a lot easier in Asia. And where citizens object less in China, the government has more power. When the citizens object less in Vietnam or some other countries around there, the government has more power. However, in India, for example, citizens are very free. They can object and protest almost anything. That's one of the reasons why India has been kind of growing quite slowly. So that's something to think about. But overall, even though the people have uncertainty avoidance, they follow the leader, and the leader in Asia was generally the government for a long time. Ulugbeck, does that make sense to you?
Yes.
The idea of how management in each country changes and the culture in each country changes. But the culture of individual people and what happens with a country sometimes can be different. So that's an interesting point to talk about. So we talked about all this, but today I'm going to be talking about more details related to that in this first 2021 East Asian Management Week 1 file. There's about 150 slides. Don't freak out, but be aware of these details as we go through them. So again, there are just a few main topics that we're going to be talking about. And oops, shrink your details. Those topics are the introduction to the management theories, the East Asian comparison, these videos, 2 million minutes, East-West Video 1, East-West Video 2, Hofstede's cultural differences, the videos in the YouTube channel that you should subscribe to and check those videos out. Week 3, next week, we'll be talking about the art of war, and then Guangxi, other Chinese management, Japanese management. I think we've already gone through and talked about this last class, correct? You guys hear this stuff before? Is it clear?
Yes.
I heard somebody say, "Boop," but I didn't hear a
I
sentence.
said yes.
Great. So the idea of Maslow, Herzberg, McGregor, what I was trying to show before is that there are many theories about how to do management. And Maslow in the 1920s, he became super famous. And almost everybody knows this hierarchy of needs. Hawthorne also came out promoting a theory of management, just showing if you give attention to the workers or try to get involved with the workers, they will do more. Herzberg came up with another theory of management saying, provided that they have reasonable work conditions and they get good attention, then they will work well. McGregor was saying there's simply two different types of people. Some people say no, and you have to look over their shoulder and keep pushing them all the time. Other workers say yes to responsibility. You just need to hire them, give them the resources, they'll work very well. So there's the X and there's the Y theories of workers with McGregor. Later, after McGregor had his X and Y, other people identified, well, it's not just like this. Maslow's wrong, Hawthorne's wrong, Herzberg's wrong, McGregor's wrong, because it doesn't work everywhere. It only works in areas where people have the same values or culture as that researcher. And almost all of these researchers were Western people. So in Asia, for example, in Japan, self is considered very bad. You're supposed to be part of the group, the social group. And so being part of the social group is considered one of the best things. And self-actualization is considered, the lowest, very bad. So it's flipped. So these do have values, but it depends on where you're working and who you're working with. So what I wanted to point out is these initially were just regular students, and they came up with suggestions. They came up with research projects that the people around them thought were great. They published them, they promoted them, they became world famous, just like you. So you can do a research project, hopefully become just as famous as them. I'm eager to help you. All of these famous research projects on what is the best way to manage were proven to be wrong in other areas. Even the idea of pay. Some people say with the reinforcement theory, you pay people well, you give lots of rewards, you get high performance. You pay people a little bit, you get low performance. Not always true. I was raised in North America. I thought that was standard. However, some of my best workers from Australia, they didn't care about pay at all. Actually, most of the best workers I've ever had never cared about pay at all. It's really interesting. The people that usually care very much about high pay, high rewards, don't usually work as well as others. But that was just in my experience, in my limited cultural survey of details. Also, I've worked with high-tech companies where they say in North America, there's equity theory. If you give stock options, ownership of the company, stock to the company, they will work better. And I was with those companies where they gave million-dollar stock options, but almost everybody except the president that I knew working quit. And so they didn't accept those stock options. Although the annual pay was very good, they quit to start other companies or do other things. So each of these could be good theories, but you need to understand how each and every one depends on where you're working and who you're working with. So this slide is showing the various different theories that have been promoted, from Hawthorne to Maslow, Herzberg, McGregor, Theory Z, expectancy, equity, reinforcement theory. This is basically a summary of what these theories are. I'm not going to focus on teaching what they are, but they are good to know. These are more details about how people identify compensation details or job security details are important. Flexibility is different and important. Even the description of management depends on where you are. Did you guys understand what this is trying to show in this slide? Mr. Moon, this green box at the bottom, do you understand what this is showing?
Like you have mentioned last time that autocratic style applies to Asia, and the other side applies to like Western side, but that doesn't mean that one side is superior than others. Like,
great. And another thing that I was trying to show is the idea of the wording. The wording autocrat or dictator usually has a negative meaning where I grew up. What is the positive meaning? What do they say here in Korea? What is one way to describe a group of people that's controlled usually by one or two people?
autocratic.
Yes, Western people, maybe you were taught in the Western environment, Western people say autocratic, yes, but that has a negative meaning. What is a good way to say a group of people that's controlled by one person or two people? Hint, hint, a father-like person or a mother-like person in a family. Hopefully your mom is good. Hopefully your dad is good, and yet they control the family, right? So that's called paternalistic management or maternalistic management. So just be aware these theories, they're good, but if you check in detail, everything needs to be understood as far as where you are. And when you're saying things, people in North America think autocratic, fine, it's okay to say it, it's just the way it is. But here in Asia, it's kind of insulting. The same as here in Korea, they say foreigner. Almost everybody that's non-Korean is a foreigner. Well, in some ways, that's considered as a guest in Korea. But when you say a foreigner in Canada, for example, it has a negative meaning. It basically means you don't belong. You're from some other place. Basically, I don't know you, go away. So be aware when you're communicating. Be aware when you're managing what is going on. Just check deeply. And in
Question about this.
Sure, go ahead.
I mean, I come from like the European perspective, and we had like a very different, very similar like outline like this, but it showed that the more free the style is, the less the employee is controlled. So for me, here it looks like the freer the style, the more control.
No, it's the opposite.
Okay, so I understood it wrong.
Autocrats have the all control. 100% of the control is controlled by the autocrats. Maximum control, minimum control by the CEOs is what we're talking about. However,
so employee control is that the employees have the control.
Correct.
Okay, then I now understand. Thanks.
Yes. In France, for example, there's the laissez-faire, which means you get hired, do what you want. It's just That is what some people say is the European style or the French style. Is that clear to you?
Yes, thanks.
I have a simple question.
Okay, great. I love these questions.
Yeah, like since you mentioned about the Canada culture, how do you call foreigners in Canada? Like,
usually you don't.
oh, okay.
How do you know? I was born in a house with my mom and dad, which they were white, but I never thought that they originally our grandparents or great grandparents came from Ireland. It's just I was my style. The people next to me were Korean. The people on the other side, on the right side, were from Nigeria. So it just, to me, people were from all over the place. I just thought that was life everywhere. And that's kind of parochial. I thought that was normal culture. And only after I started to be taught in school that, for example, in the United States, everybody should be the same. Everybody should be American. Everybody should be white. Everybody should be speaking English. That's when I started to realize, oh, there is a different way. Because in Canada, everybody's supposed to speak English and French. But we're not allowed to discriminate against somebody speaking Swahili or Chinese or Vietnamese. We're supposed to accept everybody. Even in schools in the United States, there's security guards preventing elementary school, 5-year-old kids, 6-year-old kids, you're not allowed to wear that turban. You know, some people say towel heads, or the correct word is turban, or a towel wrapped around your head. Some people actually put a religious knife inside those the clothing. But although it's for religious purposes and it has nothing to do with protection or violence, you're not allowed to have that in the United States. But in Canada, because it's religion and there's freedom of religion, you're allowed to take it. I'm not saying Canada is good. I'm just saying that I didn't know when I started studying that there was this difference. However, when I became 10 years old to 15 years old, I grew up in the Arctic Circle, close to Santa Claus. And there, you guys may be familiar with the Eskimos. Well, Eskimos is kind of a bad word, like saying Negro or nigger. It's a really bad word. It means eater of raw meat, like savage. The real word is Inuit, which means people of the land. And so there is 99% Inuit people and just a few small non-Inuit people in that community. So I grew up kind of as a minority in some areas. So it depends what you're doing. This other thing I'm showing on the slide is one part of a famous story that I think you could learn so much from. This guy, Hofstede, he can teach you so many things. I'm not saying he's the best, but you can learn a lot from him. He did a study where he had a group of people just like us in our class, and he surveyed one person from one country, and he surveyed another person from another country. One person was from China, another person from USA, another person was from Denmark, another person was from India. He surveyed those people, and he wrote down those results. And these are some of the results you're showing. And he basically just surveyed, what do you find valuable, what's important, and why do you go to work, and what is something that you don't care about at all. And so what he found in USA, can you see this slide? What it says is the most important thing is the growth of the business. Everybody in the United States knows you have to grow the business or you get fired. Next, do you go to work because of your personal wealth? And I think almost everybody in Canada and USA understand that's a normal thing. But when I moved to East Asia and I started my own companies over here and I was hiring other people, I realized that some of the best staff didn't care about personal wealth. And that shocked me, even though I already had the MBA and the graduate studies. And then I started realizing Chinese people, they say personal wealth is at the bottom. If you talk about getting rich in China, something like Jack Ma, it's slowly becoming like a dream. But because Jack Ma got so rich, so fast, and so powerful, that's why Chinese government basically stopped him. They wiped out his company. He was going to have the most powerful, most wealthy ant group in the world with an IPO. but the Chinese government just stopped it. Nope, he's making jokes about the government. He's stopped. And so now he's not promoting that anymore. And a lot of people have basically stopped that. You know, it is a trend that people want to be wealthy, but you can't talk about it openly. For example, in Korea, people have a lot of BMW cars or Mercedes cars. That's good, except if you're a government worker. If you're a government worker, you're supposed to have a Korean car. In China, it's almost the same way. If you're doing regular business, it's good if you have a car, like a Mercedes. If you have a small little cheap car, that's not really good. So you're not supposed to show off that wealth, especially if you're in big leadership or in government. I think I'm telling too many stories. I could talk about stories. I used to work with Korea's top university for a long time. And I was kind of shocked. One of the top executives in the university was a really, really nice guy. And he had a Sonata. Almost everybody here probably knows about the Hyundai Sonata. But he had like a 10-year-old Hyundai Sonata car, which I respected much more. However, our office assistant, which didn't have very much education and was just an assistant to this top-level guy, he bought like a newer, really fancy car. And I was like, cool, that's a really, really nice car. It's kind of like a sports car. But then quietly, the executives of the university, they were walking around saying, and there were some stories. And within 1 week, he took that fancy car back and he came back to work with one of the smallest, cheapest cars you can get in Korea. Even though he had the money to buy this fancier car, because he was supposed to fit in the hierarchy. And so this idea of personal wealth, how are you managing people? Are you managing by pay? Are you managing them by gifts? Well, some gifts work differently. I'd love to talk more about that. Do you guys understand what it means? Like in China, you're supposed to follow the ethical norms. You're supposed to follow national pride. You're supposed to understand power is very important. But what about honor, face, reputation? Do you understand what is face? What about Thomas? Go ahead. Is that Pia? Were you going to guess?
No, that's me.
Okay, go ahead. Sure, guess.
I think maybe face means reputation.
In some ways, yes.
Social status.
Face is similar to reputation. It is slightly different, but yes, it is related to that. It's, for example, if I am the chairman of a university department, am I supposed to drive a fancy car? Am I supposed to drive a fancy Mercedes, or am I supposed to drive a broken down, cheap, used Kia Pride that might only cost $500? That idea of, if you are part of a group in China, you're part of a group in Japan, you're part of a group in Korea, you're supposed to make the group look good. You're supposed to be representative of that group image. So if it is a very good university, you're supposed to have a good car if you're at a good level, like a chairman or a dean of a program. Something like that. That's also part of face. What you wear, the clothes you wear, is part of your face. It's not just your face, but it's your group image. Those things are really interesting. And again, the reality is these things are generally based on Western values, and it varies across cultures. I think we already talked about this last class, right? Any questions about these things? Did you see this last class before UNO?
This slide?
Yes.
I think you have shown the diagram, but not something like written down like this.
Oh, okay. I can go through it again. I want to make sure you guys are aware that there's many different theories, but regardless of what they say, you should check carefully, and regardless of how famous these people are, check the reality in your environment because many times, especially when you're working with different cultures and in different countries, you must check what is accepted by people around you before you do very much. And so these famous theories are wrong in different environments. If you're in a Western environment, fine. But if you're working with staff from Korea in your company in New York, it might not work as well. Same thing with Herzberg and the expectancy theory or the equity theory, even when you pay them a lot. Hofstede gave some answer to that. He tried to identify what are the differences between people in different countries. So you've heard me promoting Hofstede quite a bit. This is a book, and in these books that I have, I don't know if you can see it very well, one of my cameras, here is one book, and it talks over and over about Hofstede. But can you identify what is a problem with Hofstede? If he's saying people have a different culture in China than they do in India. Indian people have this culture, culture A, or culture I. Chinese people have culture C. USA culture have culture U. What's the problem with that? Can you guess?
I think India and China is so big, so each area has a different culture.
Yes, absolutely correct. So Hofstede's completely wrong. Like India alone has thousands of languages and cultures. Each culture is different. Like the culture by Calcutta, or the culture by Nepal, or the culture by Sri Lanka, they're all very, very different depending on where you go. And then there's the caste culture, different than some of the religious culture. Same thing in China. Even Vietnam is a smaller country, but I believe there's 53 or 54 different cultures in Vietnam. Canada is very hard to understand because there's so many cultures. I am Canadian, but I can't tell you what is Canadian culture because it doesn't really exist. It depends who you're talking about. It's a mix of everything. Korea is also incredibly unique. Korea is almost 100%, 98% one culture, one language, one people. So things work differently here. This is a book talking about how to motivate people from around the world, and it's talking about how the uncertainty avoidance and Hofstede's details, Maslow's details, we talked about this. It's talking more about Hofstede here and Herzberg here. But let's take a look at this top area. I apologize, this image from the book is a little bit hard to see, but if I just read it for you quickly, what motivates somebody? So we have several people in our group. We have Mr. Moon, we have Pia, we have Ulukbeg, Mr. Yu. I'm going to guess if you make, I don't know, a statue of a banana. Can you see the banana? If you make a statue of this, or I have a cup here, if you make this cup, let's say the cup costs $1 for you to sell to me. So I buy a cup, it costs $1. No problem, that's normal. But what if I tell you that I own a hotel and I have 500 rooms in the hotel, so I want to buy 500 of these cups? How much would you sell it to me for? I am the CEO of Hyatt Hotel, and I'm asking you as an artist, I love this design of the cup. You sell one for $1. How much will you sell me 500 for? Any guess, Mr. Moon, Pia, who?
$50 per each.
$50, $50, or 50 cents?
$50 per each. Some artist.
$50. Okay, you're crazy. You're cheating. You read the details. Can you explain? Because that definitely is not how I grew up. Pia, you agree that?
Yeah, I would have done it differently, because if it's like a large chain and it basically promotes my artwork, so maybe I would have made it even cheaper for him if he agrees to like promote my work this way.
Right. The whole concept of Walmart, the whole concept of capitalism, generally, or economies of scale, the more you buy, the bigger the discount you can get. You're a good customer. So one more time. You are a great customer buying so much, the company should like you. The artist should like you. The seller should like you to get that huge business. So they should give you a discount. But yes, as Mr. Moon read the details, I'm sure he read the details. An artist likes making new art, something new. And so for one, he gets a little bit of profit if he sells it at $1. Maybe 50 cents is his profit. 50 cents is his cost to make it. But if he makes 5 of them, it's not new anymore. It's not fun for him anymore. It's basically a corporate job, and the artists don't like corporate jobs. So it's torture for them. For him to do it, you need to pay me more. So yes, some people charge $500, and that's the way it is in Tahiti. And so when many Western managers went into, do you guys even know where Tahiti is? Any guesses? Where's Tahiti?
Isn't it island?
Yes, it's an island.
Pacific.
Yes, it's down Australia, New Zealand, in between there and generally South America, one of the islands. Yes, it's a small tropical vacation island. I think that's where like Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk spends a lot of time during the coronavirus time because there's not a lot of people. However, the management style there is very different than the management style in other areas. And the same thing, there's many different examples we can go through. Thank you, Mr. Moon, for telling that. Did you guess that on your own, or did you just read the PPT?
I kind of read it, but also I made it up by my hand.
Good, thank you. It pays to read the details in advance, yes. Next, the ideas of parochialism. Do you understand what is parochial? I was parochial. Is that good or bad? Ulukbek, do you know what parochial means?
No, I don't know.
It is an insult. If I say Donald Trump is parochial, that basically means he is an F, a really bad word. What kind of bad word is parochial? Parochial means you don't know shit. You don't know anything. You only know what you see, and you think there's nothing else possible. So you were born out of your mom's womb, and then you know the doctor and you know your mom, and you think whatever the doctor says is the same thing everywhere in the world. Whatever your mom says is the same thing everywhere in the universe. You don't know other moms say things differently. For example, if moms say you're supposed to go right in the top of the world, if you're looking at it and somebody's standing on the bottom, that same mom is pointing in a different direction. They're both good moms, they're just saying different directions. So understand there are other ways. Parochial is super ignorant. You don't know any other ways of doing things. It's the old-fashioned, very conservative, traditional styles. When you go to school, you get educated, and then what do you become? Pia, do you remember? What is the graduation level after you go from parochial, you go to school, you learn about other cultures, then what do you become? It's still a bad word.
Oh, I don't know the correct term for it, sorry.
It's close to that. It's called ethnocentric. When you become ethnocentric, it means you know that there is other ways. You know that there are mothers pointing in other directions, but you don't know why. And so you just think that's a stupid mother. that's a real mother. Or a father or something. You should say bad guys and girls. But most people don't seriously try to understand why that strange thing is happening that strange way. They just take a photo of it, they do a selfie of it, they laugh at it, and then they go back to their own way. Especially Donald Trump. So realize that's bad. What do you have to do? You have to invest your time. You have to invest your energy to try to understand it. For example, Donald Trump is saying Kung flu stuff and China is terrible, but China is growing faster than the United States. Isn't that better? Chinese economy, many people are saying, is now bigger than United States. China has 1.4 billion people all listening to that same way. If there's 1.4 billion people listening to the government, and that government has continued to be government for many years, isn't that better than Trump that only lasted for, can I say he was successful for 4 years? I don't think he was successful for 1 year. So that idea, you need to invest to understand why do a billion people do it differently? Or even in small countries like the Cayman Islands or Tahiti, why do people do it differently? That's when you start to go beyond ethnocentric and you become global. So there's many different ways of doing things. So this chart is more research that I'm showing. You know of Hofstede? Well, Hofstede is this one guy, Laurent is another, and he's talked about very interesting surveys. You guys need to start planning surveys if we're going to continue our group projects. And the question was, it is important for managers to have in their hand precise answers to most questions their subordinates or their staff or their workers may ever ask at work. So the manager should try to answer any possible question. That's the question. How much do the managers agree? In Japan, 78% agree. Spain, 77. Indonesia, 73. Italy, 66. France, 53. Germany, 46. Belgium, 44. 38 Switzerland, 27 England, Great Britain, 23 Denmark, 18 United States, 17 Netherlands, and 10 in Sweden. So what does that mean? How do people work in Sweden? Anybody guess? How does a manager work? Do you have to answer all questions?
Like there are no big distance between managers and workers, I believe, in Sweden.
I didn't hear you. You said that there is distance between managers and workers in Sweden?
There are not much distance, which means that workers like to work independently.
Yeah, maybe. You're close with many things. Yes, good. And you're using the Hofstede terminology. The power distance is what you're talking about, correct? There's very little power distance there. Great.
Yeah, that's what I also would say. I think Japan has very strict hierarchy. So the managers need to know their answers because they don't always probably want to go to their superior to ask again. And for example, I'm German and we know that we need a lot of answers, but there's also the needance for flexibility because you don't always want to ask your superior. So I think that's why they say you need lesser answers, but you still need to be able to answer them.
Awesome. So we are thinking about a university graduate just starts working for a company and goes and talks to, or you're thinking about talking to the CEO. And so everything you said is true. What if you are the regular worker and or you're the manager, not the CEO, you're not the director, you're just a regular manager, and your new university student asks you, what is the engineering thickness and density of this cup material? Do you need to guess, or do you tell them, go talk to the engineering department? Do you do that?
No, you would definitely tell them to go to the different department because it's not possible to know about everything in a company, especially if it's
whoa,
huge.
just a minute. Whoa.
Am I wrong?
Are you trying to say that the German way is the only way?
No, of course not.
Okay, so how is it that the managers in Spain or in Japan deal with those questions?
But do they really does a manager from finance have to know how thick a cup is? Do they have to answer questions like this? Is it possible to answer questions like this?
Let's not think about today because things are changing really fast in Korea, but UNO and Mr. Moon, you know about education that your parents had. when your parents were in school, were they allowed to ask questions to the teacher?
No.
Or if they ask a question, what would happen?
They will get beat up.
They would get beat up. Yeah, they would be, what's it called? Disciplined is a nice word. Beat up is a bad word. But yes, and that goes into the companies. So the workers don't ask questions to the managers. The workers ask questions to the other workers or their alumni or their friend network, or they go get the manager drunk at night and then ask them these important questions when they're drunk, because you're not supposed to ask those questions in the daytime. So the questions change. And in that sense, any question that is given to a manager or a CEO is designed to be respectful so that the manager should be able to answer it. So your idea of nobody's allowed to do that, well, here it's different. In Japan and Spain, it's kind of different. So what you know and what I know, it's nice, but the only thing that really matters is what happens for the people around us. How are they doing it here, not back home for me in Canada, or not back home for you in Germany? Does that make sense, Pia? Or can I just
Yes,
say,
it does.
or can I just say all German people are wrong?
No, yeah, of course.
Uh,
No, I was just confused if it's like possible for a Japanese worker, but they're very different in their styles. So that's what confused me.
You're right. Good. So what about this other question? It's the same researcher. Here, you're asking a simple question and you can get a simple answer. But as we just identified, understanding that simple answer, it takes some time. And that's why this is a great research project. Another research project is simple question about the main reason for having a hierarchy is so that everybody knows who's your superior, who has authority over who. So if you're a high school student and you get a job in a company, the university student is your boss. You need to do everything they say. And the university student has the older manager that is their boss. You need to do everything they say. So the main reason for that hierarchical structure is for people to know who you should go to, who has authority over you. So the relationship people, they said they 83% agree. In Great Britain, 34% agree. In Germany, 26% agree. In United States, 17% agree. So what does that mean? So in United States, 83% say the hierarchy is not important. There is no function for it. There is no reason for it. Nobody is supposed to care about who has authority over you. You do what's reasonable, that's best for the company. And would you agree that's the same thing in Germany, Pia? It doesn't really matter who's your boss. It matters what is efficient.
Well, it doesn't matter who's your boss. I think it's best to know who's responsible for the job that you have to do, so you can ask them questions.
Do you realize that I have had amazing students and I help them get jobs working for famous hotels? I'm not going to say the name of the famous hotel in Seoul, Korea, but the student was bragging. 1 week they came back to the class and they, thanks, because of the research project, I got a job in this hotel. I've been hired. Wow. Everybody was happy for them. They were a very young student. They were second-year student. But about 3 weeks later, they came in and the student was crying. And the class was talking about them, about management. It was like, so when we started talking about this, the student started crying when we talked about this. Why are you crying? What's going on? And she was saying, I think I just got fired. Why? Because I talked to the vice president. That's it. What's the problem? She said, I don't know. But I talked to the vice president and I think my manager is going to fire me now. The manager's really upset. Why? Because university students are supposed to be managed by the manager. And the manager is supposed to summarize all details, take all headaches away, and just help the vice president do more work, do better work, not answer basic questions that this young university student had. And so when a customer in the hotel came in and had a crazy, strange question, and this university student couldn't find their manager, but they saw the vice president walking by, they said, "Excuse me, vice president, here is a customer, here's the question, can you answer this question?" And the vice president was really, kind of answered it, but didn't answer it well. It was kind of confidential. And so they were a little bit uncomfortable. And so the vice president made this huge complaint to the manager, and the manager was in really big trouble just because the student asked a basic question for helping a customer. So that is just one concept. Why is there a hierarchy? You're supposed to help depending on where you are. Some places they need it, some places they don't. Indonesia, China, Japan, Korea, you definitely need it. But in other areas, you don't. So be aware of that. When you try to get a job, it's sometimes good to have the CEO of a company friends with you. Like, I know the president of this university because one of my very, very good friends was almost best friends with the president of this university. So I could have dinner with my best friend and he could bring the president of the university almost every week. But I don't do that because the chair and the dean of my department, if they see me, they're thinking I'm going around them. It would be very awkward here in Korea. Is that clear to you guys? I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying there are different ways of doing things. And regardless of what may happen in Canada, Korea was one of the fastest growing countries in the world. So whatever they did, it worked well. It's changing rapidly now, though. So these are types of examples. Here's more results, and these are talking about from Hofstede again, and they're talking about the power distance compared to individualism of different countries. Hong Kong is here, which means they have very large power distance, and the idea of individualism versus power distance is different. Japan is here compared to Hong Kong. USA is here compared to the others. Be aware of this. If you want, we can go through some of these books and chapters. These are some of the reading materials. Here is more details talking about the same thing. The idea of power distance and uncertainty avoidance. Small power distance, large power distance, strong uncertainty avoidance, weak uncertainty avoidance. Denmark, Sweden, Ireland, Great Britain, very weak uncertainty avoidance, which means they'll try anything, talk about anything, do anything. Down here, you'll have Japan, Argentina. What is GRE? Which country is that? GER is Germany. Anyway, the codes are here. We can check those details out. It's interesting. Different countries work different ways. So who are you? What is your culture? Do you know yourself in detail? Of course, you're special, but how? You know that there's east, west, north, south, but that's actually racist to say that. Why do people say Australians are on the bottom of the world? The world rotates, right? You just rotate the world and Australia's on the top and Canada's on the bottom. What about Oreos and bananas? Do you guys know what is an Oreo or a banana? I see Moon, you're saying yes, you do know. Can you explain what is that?
I just know banana, like Asians who was born in Western country, like Korean American, they have a American way of thinking, but they look yellow. So that's why they are called as bananas.
Right. It could be a really, really bad thing to say. You have a white inside, a white value, white thinking style, but you look Asian, you look yellow. And the Oreo is a cookie with the black on the outside and the white on the inside. I'm afraid to say that as a professor. Can anybody guess? What do you think is an Oreo? You know? Can you guess what is an Oreo?
It's like something like African American trying to uh
Live.
live
Very-
like the white Americans or have a,
Oh, didn't
huh?
you say African American? Isn't
Yeah,
African American allowed to live like an American?
and
That's
like have a
dangerous.
mindset of the white people in the United States.
Whoa, 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 we're going to get in so much trouble. Isn't the mindset of African Americans American? And aren't white Americans American? Aren't they both the same mindset? But
Um,
by saying that one American needs to have the mindset of another American, that's really bad, right?
yeah. That's a
Thank you for showing our class trying to do good. You can have a lot of problems with diversity. So you really need to check. It was a simple answer. I gave you a hint saying, I'm afraid to talk about it because it's hard to answer. You were giving a perfect answer, but it's really hard to describe. Maybe people with dark skin in a white environment, even that is bad because the white environment, it could be South Africa. In South Africa, it has the white environment sort of thinking in some styles. So, but many people have used it. So you should be aware. Stereotypes, are they good or are they bad? Ulugbeck, do you think these are stereotypes? Bananas, stereotypes. Oreos, stereotypes. Do you think stereotypes are good or bad?
I don't have any idea.
Uh, Anybody else want to guess? Thomas, I haven't seen you or heard from you in a while. What would you say?
Well, I would say that stereotypes might be helpful sometimes, but like in general, like if I would have to say if they are good or bad, I would say that maybe they are more on like side, but they can be useful to some people or in certain situations.
Right. The research says that there's so much information in the planet, in the world, you can't remember and manage everything separately, individually. You have to put things in different boxes. And so stereotypes are a way to just group things together so you better understand them. However, if you use a stereotype without checking if it's true, that is a big mistake because African Americans are Americans, period. If you describe them differently as white Americans, that's racist. That's prejudice. That would get me in big trouble if I was in North America. So make sure you appreciate stereotypes, but check, is it okay to say this? What do you think this means? That's why I asked you, it's safer. Is that clear to you guys? I see a big smile with Mr. Moon, but I hope I don't offend anybody. Ultimately, cultures can be complex. Do you have good understanding of how to appreciate those differences? Can you think of other ways to characterize cultures? Are you ready to manage people from other cultures? Are you ready to interact with people from other cultures? We're in Korea. This is East Asian International Management. Korea, Japan, China, is it all the same? You may know that there's certain special relationship between the Japanese and Korean. Mr. Moon, I'm not as good as talking about that. Are Japanese and Korean best friends, or are there issues between them?
Well, there's always issue regarding island of Dokdo. Like especially the old generation, like my grandfather, grandma, they really don't like Japanese. But I think for the younger generation like us, they don't really care about some rival issue between Japan. We just don't like the Japanese government, not the Japanese.
Okay, good. That was a very politically correct, safe answer. Good. So what is culture? There are many, many, many definitions. I think this picture is the easiest definition. Not because it was created by a friend that was from Canada, Nancy Adler, that created this book that I highly recommend for our class, but culture consists of values, and the values are made up of your attitudes, and your attitudes make your behavior, and your behavior makes your culture. And so this is culture. It's a group of people with shared values, with shared attitudes, shared behavior for the shared culture. It can change from culture to culture. It can change, from country to country. It can change from old people to young people. It can change from the north of a country to the south of the country, or big city of a country to the small rural farm areas of the country. So cultures is just a group of values, beliefs, attitudes of people. And so culture made of values, made of attitudes, made of behavior back. So that's the circle. It includes risk tolerance, interest in family, power, individualism, much, much, much more. Hofstede and Adler, Trompenaar, Quartz, I'm going to go through a lot of that. But before I start introducing many different cultural dimensions and theorists, I want to make sure you guys are aware of this important thing. Ethnocentrism. I just want to remind you, ethnocentrism is the notion that your culture or your company knows best how to do things, and that's wrong. To help you understand, ethnocentrism is very tightly associated with very bad people, because we have an amazing German student, I'm afraid to say, Adolf Hitler, but everybody knows Adolf Hitler, he's super, super famous. But did you know that he also has some of the best leadership styles in the world? However, there's good things and bad things about everybody. Obviously, there's many bad things about him, but he was ethnocentric. He thought his culture was better than other cultures, so he killed them. Some people think you are better than insects, so you kill insects. Maybe you might say that insects don't have culture, but argue that with vegans, for example. SRC is yourself. That is a problem. Everybody's self, including some of these things I say, are problems. So SRC is your self-reference criterion. Your unconscious reference to yourself and your own cultures, your own value, your own experiences, and your knowledge for making decisions is a mistake. Like, Pia, you're a great student. I love having you in class, but you answering and saying something about Germany as just a matter of fact, it is a matter of fact to you, but in Germany, it's different than in Japan. And Mr. Yu, the exact same thing. You say some things in Korea, it's perfectly normal, but in the United States, it's not accepted, and in other areas. So you need to understand yourself, the criteria of relying on yourself when you're trying to do international business, the criteria of relying on yourself for trying to communicate with people from another culture or country can be a huge problem. It's bad. It's a challenge. You need to get over it. The key to success for international management is adaptation to the environment. Learn those differences. Work with that other environment. So SRC is the first problem. Know yourself. Everybody is born parochial, and then after you get educated, you still become ethnocentric. Both of these are kind of bad. Only you've invested time, energy, and thought into it, you become better and more global. We're almost out of class. I just wanted to summarize. Culture is not right or wrong. It's not about the individual behavior. It's about a group. It's not inherited. So metaphors are good. Stereotypes are good. Idioms are good. It helps you manage information. It helps you remember details. But you must check. Is it okay? Is it true? If you don't check if it's true, and you start saying things like Kung Flu, what Donald Trump said about Koreans or Chinese being Asians in North America, he actually said all Asians are the same. Well, if somebody's parents grew up in New York and that person was born in New York and they were living their whole life in New York, Are they Korean? Are they Chinese? Are they not 100% pure American? So make sure we think about those things. Socialization, acculturation. Culture is like an iceberg. So the idea of acculturation is the process of adjusting and adapting to a new culture. Enculturation with an E is learning about your own culture. Acculturation with the A is learning about a new culture. So socialization is just learning about the rules and behaviors of people. Culture is like an iceberg. It's hard to understand what's right, what's wrong, what are the details. You see some parts, but not all. Find drama, what you can say, what you can do, the etiquette, the religions. Those things are pretty easy to see. But the idea of the eye behavior, did you realize when I came to Korea, I was not allowed to wear glasses like this? I don't know if you can even see these glasses, but I also had small round glasses. There was a time in Korea, especially with big famous companies, where certain people were allowed to have small round glasses. Other people had to have the big square glasses. If you're an executive, you have one style. If you're high level, one style. If you're low level, you have a different style, just like I talked about with the car. Some people don't know that until you actually research and get into these details. How you solve a problem. Are you allowed to ask the vice president to help a client if you're right there? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. The decision making. Are you allowed to answer the question? Are you allowed to ask the question with the top director? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So this concept, I wanted to make sure you guys are aware of it. Do you guys remember what this was showing? Did I talk to you guys about this before? Pia, did you see this video before?
I did see it, but I don't remember that specific example. I remember that they also had like flower examples.
Yes, there was the monkey banana, the balloon, the park bench, the spaceship example, the people. Is this man in the middle, is he happy? Yes, no. Depending on where you are, most people would say yes. And then this next one, is this man in the middle, how do you describe him? If you're in North America, individualist. If you're a Western person, individual type person, you just look at the individual fact, the smile. You don't even care about the arms. You don't even care about the eyes. You just care generally, is he smiling? Yes or no. But in many other Asian countries, you care about the group and the collective idea. It's not just an individual person idea. Collective refers to the whole group, what you're thinking about and the big picture. So the big picture is many people are not happy. So you would say this picture, not happy. Even though the man in the middle was the question, it changes. Did you guys check this? Can you guys please go through these things online? As far as I understand, these are our class time is basically up. We'd like you guys to pick one of these that we're talking about, these pictures, and try to explain them. So these pictures, pick some of these pictures, and there's many more examples in these videos. Just try to explain them. This is my favorite with the cereal boxes and the fish. This one is quite interesting. This is the third video, or the last video that's linked, and it's just talking about students are different. It's two students in a regular town in the United States, two regular students in India, two regular students in China, and the Chinese education system is almost identical to Korea. So part of the answer is here.